A quick heads up for listeners with sensitive ears. This episode contains some strong language. Stick around.
Just the process of making art, I think, is inherently queer, because I've always thought of it as a form of self-love. You have to get through the parts that are imperfect and gross before you get to the parts that are beautiful. And the ugly parts aren't a sign of failure in any sense. They're just the manifestation of the change and growth that we all go through.
You're listening to the Local Glow.
DIY music. It's where real life and art
act and come crashing together in fits of intimacy, confusion,
and glory.
Punk, it's where the gender fucking is.
It's where resilience and resistance are in your blood. And queer. It's who you are.
Today on The Local Glow, we're talking with 3 active members of the Fed Up Fest Collective, a group in Chicago, Illinois, who put on the city's preeminent queer and trans punk and hardcore festival, which will be coming up later this month, July 28th through the 30th. In preparation for the weekend of music, art, and queer empowerment, we wanted to sit down with these folks and learn about the fest and the world of Chicago's queer and trans punk culture behind it. You'll meet Masha, Ash, and E, hear their stories, and hear about the 10 months of work that they invest every single year in the development of Fed Up Fest and its related events. Putting together a DIY fest of this size, building it from the ground up by hand, especially with a vision as radical and powerful as theirs, you've got to be fed up. My name is Tarek Shahada, and this is The Local Glow, an independent podcast out of Chicago, Illinois, about local music culture in the Midwest and the stories of where it's been and where it's going. The first piece I want to talk about on today's episode is the relentless spirit that Masha, Ash, and E, and the rest of the collective have for the creation of this unique space that elevates and empowers queer voices in Chicago. The will do whatever it takes attitude, the 10 months a year work ethic, is amazing. It's unusual. I mean, spending countless hours a year volunteering to invest your time, skills, and emotional strength to put on a series of events without asking for a penny in return. Who does that? Now, for context, I'm a straight, cis, white, middle-class man, and I literally have privilege to spare, so I am absolutely no authority on what the experience of being queer is. But talking with queer friends around the region, as well as today's guests, I can't help but believe that this drive that the Fed Up Fest Collective has, at least to some degree, stems from their experience of being queer in a largely queer-phobic world. A world in which, depending on how you look and where you are at any given moment, you can become the target of society's vitriol, simply for the transgression of being who you are. Whether you're trying to fly under the radar or you wear your queer identity on your sleeve, it can feel like this country isn't really a nation by the people, for the people like you. You don't have to look far to find oppressive mechanisms built into the fabric of our society and, as you can imagine, our local culture. And if you, as a queer person, have to fight for the freedom and safety to be yourself in everyday life, I bet you'd be ready to fight for the freedom and safety of your queer peers as well. I asked our guests if they could share a few words about their experience of being queer in Chicago and the Midwest more broadly. Here's Ash.
I feel like being queer in Chicago is actually really awesome. When I leave Chicago, I'm often realizing the bubble that I'm in. You go anywhere with like less than 1 million people, like you're probably gonna be obvious. But being queer in general has been a fucking struggle. But the older I get, the more I learn, like the more I am grateful that do get to experience like all of these wild ways of life, which do include oppression regularly, unfortunately. But yeah, it's tough. It's not easy, but it's something that I'm proud of. So,
E spoke up next.
So, I grew up in Portland, Oregon, which, when you talk about like a bubble, I feel like my bubble burst actually when I moved to the Midwest around age 27. Yeah, I felt like, I mean, even just in the past few years when I've gone back, it feels remarkably different. The space there, I feel like I don't stand out as much. I feel like I'm able to look the way I want to look and act the way I want to act, and it just doesn't seem as like bizarre to people. Whereas here, I regularly get like just straight up stared at. I feel unsafe a lot of the times because of that. I'll be like walking my dog with like a bag of dog poop in my hand and just like get weird looks from people, like, or like get honked at and stuff. I feel like the kind of stuff in Portland, like people would like be like, "You're great, you're like looking cool," or whatever. It'd be like way more positive reinforcement. But here, it just, I don't see it in the punk spaces I'm in. I don't see it just out on the street. I don't like even physically or visually see other people that look like me, I think. And so like that is like very off-putting as like, yeah, just like trying to exist in this space.
So E felt like they left their bubble after moving to the Midwest from Portland and settling in Chicago. On the flip side, Ash actually felt the opposite way after moving from a small town in Michigan to Chicago.
Where in Michigan?
Oh, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Not Detroit, not Ann Arbor, somewhere in between. There weren't queer, like we, like you all, like someone would be like, "Oh, you're looking cool," like you were saying out west, like where I'm from, people do stare at you, and I think like I was like hardened, and when I moved to the city, I was like, "Fuck yes, I can disappear here. I can just be like tough as nails, and like if someone looks at me weird, I can be like, fuck you, and like move on, and I'll never see that person possibly again." You know, I don't know, like, because my hometown is definitely no more than 30,000 people, so it's, you know, compared to here, like this is my bubble. Like even when I leave here, I'm like, when I go back home, I'm like, God, I don't want to have to, I got to bring my dog with me, I don't want to like stop at the rest areas along the way. I don't know, but that's I think maybe it's when you talk about people staring, like if you're not a man, like that's the world we live in. Like if you're not like a visible, like assumed straight cis man, like you're subject to that kind of bullshit.
Next, Masha jumped in.
I'm from the suburbs of Chicago, but I spent a decade living in other places, in the Midwest, in the East Coast, and a little bit of time on the West Coast and in the South. And being queer in all those places, more than anything, for me, it was a way to, like, create community. Like, more than anything, like, that's what I find in queerness, is, like, I'm of a personality, or of the personality that, like I was just hearing the descriptions of, like, your experiences of, like, getting stared at on the streets and stuff like that. Like, how do I say this without sounding like a hothead? Like I stare back. Like, I threaten. I try to threaten people as much as they threaten me. I cannot help it. It's like my fucking reflex. So for me, being queer, it's like I feel like I have people behind me. You know, I am femme presenting. I have looked older than my age since I was like 13 years old. I'm like so used to the male gaze. And yeah, I just feel like now being queer gives me, it makes me feel like I have people to face that with. And like that's all, like in terms of like what I can control, like I can control the people around me. I'm more likely to find people who have my back in queer spaces. It makes me feel like I can like enter these places feeling a bit more confident, but like always expecting that I might have to defend myself or my friends.
Yo, that's like right on. Like once I realized, like, because I didn't know like what queer was, like in terms of like being politically queer and that being sharing like a general sense of what it means to fight for the liberation of queer and trans folks in your everyday life, be it your music, your art, your work, if you can do that too. But like where I came from, like I would get attacked. Like I've had a car like come up, see me and, you know, a partner holding hands in a car and like chase us down and then have children in their car to tell us that we were fucked up, you know, and like almost like cause accidents and shit. And so, yeah, like once I was like, oh, queer, what is this? What is this queer? And there are queer people here that identify. Like that was immediately like the sense I got. And like, yeah, finding queer was finding people having my back. Mm-hmm. Chicago taught me like how to be queer and channel a lot of my anger from fucking growing up in a place where I had to physically defend myself into really great things. So it's pretty awesome. I wish that, you know, it's been a long fucking road. This is not some walk in the park, that's for sure. And it's still going.
Art has a way of getting under your skin, passing over your walls and through your rational filters to tug at your heartstrings. So, after hearing from Masha, Ash, and E about their experiences of being queer in the Midwest, I wanted to know where music and music culture came into the picture, and if one guided them to the other. Here's what E had to say.
I got so much to say about this, so I'm going to have to keep it brief. I have identified as a punk probably over half of my life. I started getting into punk like in the like maybe late 90s, listening to like early Green Day and I don't know, like No Doubt and stuff like that. So I was a punk before I realized I was queer. I've definitely always been queer. I just didn't have the words for it because we definitely have a wider vocabulary now. But I definitely knew I was like some kind of weirdo, right? I was like some kind of freak. So I was like a punk and that made sense. And then kind of slowly like realizing like, oh, there's like other fucking weirdos here. There's like other freaks, like there's other queers. This is like a thing. And like, I think that now I think about it and it like makes sense. Like in some ways, like punk is sort of this like gender neutral word. And also within punk, like aesthetically, it's very like androgynous and sometimes very gender neutral. Like historically, it's this place of like lots of different people like wear like makeup and fishnets and like dress up and like dudes can do stuff with their hair and that's not weird and like, you know, ladies can wear like Doc Martens and that's cool and tough. So like there's this like weird space there where I think that like punk has always felt right for a lot of reasons for me. It's where the weirdos are. It's where like the gender fucking is. It's where the music that I love is. In some way, it probably helped me realize what's going on with my gender and stuff. But yeah, I came to Chicago specifically for the punk scene here. I started a band when I was in Madison, Wisconsin. I was going to school there, and the scene is rough there. There's not much going on. It's a college town. It's a lot of like just towny bands going nowhere. And so I was like, I saw that Clit Fest was happening a couple years ago, and so I went down here for that, and Fed Up Fest a couple years after, and I just kept coming back, and I kept meeting more people and realizing there's this like amazing, not just queer and trans, not just punk, but there's queer and trans punks of color, which was so important to me because coming from Portland, which is over 90% white, and so it was like definitely coming here and being like, oh my God, this is incredible. So yeah, it all just kind of solidified, and then I was like, well, I guess I have to move here. So then I did, and I got involved with Fed Up Fest.
So what is Fed Up Fest? Fed Up Fest is an all-ages annual punk and hardcore music festival put on in the heat of the Chicago summer by a small group of local radical punks to celebrate queer and trans voices in music. The fest has been going strong for a few years now, and it's designed to be more than just a fun weekend of events with the dopest music around. The fest and its creatives are dedicated to elevating the visibility of radical queer, trans, gender nonconforming, and intersex people in punk and hardcore scenes. The fest encompasses music, art, and workshops, and actively confronts and challenges the perpetuation of oppression and abuse in these scenes. The collective behind Fed Up Fest aim to combat oppressive culture by making punk a site of resistance. They work to build and strengthen bonds between punk, queer, radical, and activist communities, and aim to center marginalized voices through their events. Their words are stirring, and I'm betting this year's fest is going to be fire. For 2017, after months of related events and fundraisers leading up to it, the festival will finally be taking place just a week after the release date of this episode, July 28th through the 30th. You can find out a lot more on their Facebook and their website if you want to be a part of the fest this year. We'll link them in the show notes. And I hope you'll try to make it out, queer or not. Music and art by queer and trans people is often swept aside in local music scenes, and the artists are othered. This festival is a time for everybody to come together and celebrate and empower them. And hey, maybe we'll even take some of the spirit of the fest along with us throughout the rest of the year. Here's Laura, one of our producers.
Fed Up Fest is more than just a boon for inclusiveness and acceptance in a culture where homophobia and transphobia are very real and present threats to music creators and music lovers alike. It's also a massive benefit. The fest and all the related events surrounding it are a mechanism for the local community to raise money for organizations that share their goals of empowering queer and trans folk in and around Chicago. Each year, they select one group to be the beneficiary of their fundraising, and this year, they've selected a group called El Rescate. I had the chance to speak with their program coordinator, M. Echeverria, who explained to me what El Rescate is and how they got started.
Okay, so El Rescate is a transitional living program for youth ages 18 to 24 that are experiencing homelessness and that identify as LGBTQ. So this program has been around for about 5 years now. Initially, it's an initiative of the Puerto Rican Cultural Center. That's our umbrella organization. Around 5 years ago, one of our sister programs, which is called Vida Cita, which translates to AIDS Life, and it's kind of pretty obvious what their work is around. Workers in that program started noticing a lot of homeless gay youth in the community. And so through that, they decided to create this program to provide services for those youth that were in need. And that's why we're here.
El Rescate is a part of the Puerto Rican Cultural Center, which has a big presence in the Humboldt Park community and has many programs and initiatives pertaining to things like mental health, women and youth services, addiction, counseling, and even an emergency overnight shelter for minors. El Rescate's newest initiative is the Basic Center, which offers preventative services for minors experiencing housing instability. Another big part of their work is housing youth that are living with HIV and educating young people about safe sex and how to protect themselves and potential partners. Even though El Rescate is focused on LGBTQ youth, they are by no means exclusive. As Echeverria told me, a youth in need is a youth in need. I brought up Fed Up Fest next and asked how El Rescate will be using the funds they receive from the proceeds of the event.
We are so extremely grateful to be the recipient this year. I mean, I just feel so blessed with the help that's kind of come to us, especially in these times of need. So we're very grateful for that. As far as, what that would look, I mean, that would really help us provide more, significant programming. We're hoping to, create a raised garden in our backyard area. All these little things that costs money that we don't have. and just providing just different things for our youth to participate in. A big part of our program is also trying to teach our youth about the culture of Chicago. And, a lot of our kids have never been outside of their little neighborhood, or, don't go to museums, or, don't go downtown, or, go to the Adler. So it's like we really want to kind of expose them to some things that they've not yet been exposed to that maybe a lot of us regular Chicagoans take for granted.
El Rescate has been offering much-needed services to the community despite a lack of funds. With this support from the Fed Up Fest, they'll be able to expand their programming in health and community services and offer even more to youth in need. Valuable things we often take for granted, like trips to cultural institutions or just the joy of growing a garden. If you want to find out more, you can find them on Facebook or go through the Puerto Rican Cultural Center's website, linked in the show notes.
Let's head back to the interview. Here's E again, sharing about their experience of being at Fed Up Fest and what the space feels like.
But yeah, I mean, overall, it seems like people just think this is like, at least my experience too, before I got involved and I went to it, it just seems like this magical space that gets created. And if you don't know what goes behind it, if you just show up for those like 3 days, it is just like this like utopian vision of just like, you get fed and you get to watch all these amazing bands and you get to meet people and you get to read zines you'd never read and you get to like hear other folks talking about incredible things at workshops and then you have to leave and go back into the real world. So it definitely feels like this space that a lot of people respond really positively to, but not always.
Yeah, it's also like it's a space where you're really likely to not just be immediately gendered by people, which is really big. I mean, people do it. Don't get me wrong. Like this, we're also learning. This is all new language, and But yeah, you can be there, and like there's a really good chance that when you meet people, like they're gonna say like, "Oh, I'm so and so, and my pronouns are this," and then like just having that prompt, like, and having the space where it's like, I feel like I can prompt, I have to prep myself every day to think about like, okay, am I just going to be inside of myself today and like just let people do whatever they want? Or am I actually going to do I have it in me to be like, hey, I'm Ash, I use they, them pronouns. How about you? Or like that's hard, like in everyday life. So having a place to be like, oh my God, there's all these like beautiful queer and trans folks, like, and we're all gonna like respect each other and eat food and like have fun with hardcore. It's like really great.
I wanted to take a minute and pause here because I think the illustration that Ash just gave is worth delving into. They talk about finding a very real comfort and belonging in the space that Fed Up Fest creates, where people don't immediately gender them and unconsciously assign pronouns, making assumptions about deeply personal elements of Ash's identity, such as their gender, and prescribing their own understanding of who Ash should be. For folks who fit into the traditional binary gender experiences of man and woman, such as myself, it might not be obvious why this is so significant. I mean, I've never been bashed for my gender identity. And being the beneficiary of cultural norms that recognize me and name me consistent with how I identify, it'd be easy to not care. I mean, not my problem, right? But I'd encourage you to take a second look, like I did. Gender identity is a big deal. Everyone has one, and it's really worth caring about. Would you want to be called something you're not? And would you be cool with everyone around you feeling like they get to pick who you should be?
I run and hide. I run and hide. I run and hide. I run and hide.
She is you.
I talked to E about this after our interview to get their view on how to maneuver the topic of pronouns when meeting new people.
So much to say about this.
Both at Fed Up Fest and just in everyday life. E shared some great ideas, which I'll go ahead and summarize here. When introducing yourself, regardless of your gender identity, try to mention your own pronouns to open up the conversation. It creates a good starting point and invites others to do the same. In professional settings where you have a name tag, write your pronouns along with your name. Or if there are introductions or an icebreaker, just slip it in. Avoid using gendered language, if possible, until someone shares their pronouns. Until then, just use gender-neutral words and refer to people by their names. It's not too hard. Finally, just remember that everyone has a gender identity of their own. This is about people feeling comfortable being who they are, and it's worth making the effort.
Hey there, this is Colin Althouse. I play guitar in the band Terra Terra from Champaign, Illinois. If you're hearing this, it probably means that you're listening to The Local Glow. This podcast is brand new, and we're still trying to spread the word about it, so please give us a like and a share on Facebook if you're enjoying it so far. And be sure to subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're feeling particularly generous, find us on Patreon at patreon.com/thelocalglow. Because supporting local podcasts is an awesome thing to do, but also because you can pick up some cool perks. Back to the show.
So next up, I asked a pretty cheesy question. Like we heard earlier, the Fed Up Fest Collective, made up exclusively of volunteers, works extensively on developing the fest, about 10 months out of the year by Masha's estimation. And I asked them what makes this event or series of events worth all of that time and all of their blood, sweat, and tears. The responses had me floored.
So, I mean, aside from feeling really strongly about our beneficiaries, the opportunity to create, like, shine a spotlight, I don't know what cliche to use, really. Just, like, the opportunity to be like, you people who are here and contributing, like your work matters, the stuff that you have to say matters, your presence here matters, like our community matters. Like, it means so much to me to know that, like, I can be involved in making people feel that way. And then also, like, sharing the resources that I have access to, or, like, rather, you know, maybe in a different way, like, sort of like distributing the resources that I have access to, whether it's like my emotional labor, which is like a really big part of the roles that I choose to take on in Fed Up Fest, like navigating difficult venue owners, for example, or, like, you know, whatever, or, like, you know, volunteering to speak to cops if it comes to that, like, whatever it might be, like doing stuff like liaisoning between and, like, navigating, like, uncomfortable or difficult social interactions between people who show up to the space. Like, for me, even if it's only for just 3 days, like, having the opportunity to, like, do that and to take that position so that other people don't have to deal with that, like, it just makes me feel amazing. So that's why I do it.
I also think that it's a lot of skills building. Like, 10 months, you really start to learn the task or the role that you take on, and we're all there to help each other through it. There's a lot of institutional memory shared through Google Docs, and the few people that have stuck around, like, for several years. But it's a lot of skills that we don't get access to otherwise. Like, you know, I've learned so much about, like, I could probably book my own fest now with all the stuff I've learned. It's like, who can say that? I mean, it's so incredible to just get to work with a bunch of people, pooling our resources, both tangible and intangible, and coming out with this thing that I'm so proud of, and, like, coming out the other end with, like, so many skills. And, like, when I think about what it means to, like, empower queer and trans folks, which is in our mission, I think about, like, that's what that means. It's like we actually come out with more knowledge and more skills to be able to just, like, keep supporting ourselves, keep supporting our communities, and being visible and surviving. And, like, that is so amazing to me that, like, I've gotten to do this.
What does Fed Up Fest do to help showgoers who make it to Fed Up Fest feel empowered and to take that empowerment and do something with
I can at least talk about the community of care statement, which I think is pretty central to that. So we have the mission statement, obviously, which is pretty broad about like empowerment and stuff like that. And then we've tried to craft a little bit more beyond that to sort of like lay out exactly what like our politics are. Yeah, so not like, to make people feel shamed or like we're going to kick people out for doing the wrong things or saying the wrong things or what have you. But really to just try and create a space that is like harm-free as possible, knowing that harm will always occur, or there's always the potential for harm, even in queer spaces, even in intentional spaces, even in radical spaces. We wanted to be really intentional, and just say, these are things that we look out for. This is like stuff that we consider to be harmful and we don't want to see in our space. And so hopefully that mitigates some of that harm that we see in the rest of the world. We want the space to be different.
Here's Laura again.
At the beginning of their community care statement, the members of Fed Up Fest write, "We believe that at the center of liberation is radical love for each other and ourselves. That love pushes us to try and create a better world. Because of that, we are working to minimize the amount of harm that occurs in our space." Fed Up Fest is about giving space and appreciation to people who may not find it in other local music spaces. In their community care statement, they address their commitment to call out and fight against white supremacy, cultural appropriation, misogyny, transphobia, fatphobia, ableism, and rape culture. They also give tips as to how people with various types of privilege can act respectfully in the space. Examples of this include respecting pronouns and not assuming anyone's gender identity, giving space to people of color at the front and center and knowing when white voices are not needed, being mindful of the impact on other people while moshing, and respecting every type of body as powerful. The Fed Up Fest is also a dry space, as they stand in solidarity with people who are under the legal smoking and drinking age, those who are sober, and those who are working through substance abuse. Also stated is their work towards an anti-authoritarian, consensual, non-punitive model of conflict resolution, as violence from the state and law enforcement is often used to oppress marginalized communities. If anyone is enacting any of these forms of harm in the space, members of Fed Up Fest will approach and talk with them. They'll be asked to address the situation and the harm done, and asked to relearn how to interact with others in the space without violence and harm. If the person cannot address it or is unwilling, they will be asked to leave. The statement ends with the words, "We seek to forge stronger bonds and create a community that we can rely on, rather than systems of violence." Being accountable to each other is a good way to start.
As far as an example, I mean, a pretty clear one comes to mind from last year. Yes. Cultural appropriation is specifically articulated in the community of care statement as a harm that we will intervene in if we see it perpetuated in the space. And so, white dreads are going to happen. I don't know why, but they're going to happen.
Give a definition of white dreads.
It's a person who is white who has their hair in what some might call dreadlocks. I don't know if it's fair to call it that for white people, but there were 3 instances that I can remember last year of people in the space perceived to be white who had dreadlocks. And as a collective, we've determined that the white folks in the collective will be the ones to like approach and educate and have a conversation. And so, per this agreement that we have internally in the community of care statement, these 3 particular people got approached, and one interaction was the person kind of blew us off, and like that's going to happen. Another interaction was with somebody who is definitely white but non-American. Came from somewhere in Europe. I can't remember exactly where that is. Like, this person genuinely had never been aware that their hair was appropriative and offensive and etc. And so we, shared with them the community of care statement. We also encouraged people to read it before coming into the space. But so we shared that with them. We had several conversations with them about what it means to be a white person with dreadlocks. And then literally later that night, this person shaved them off at the fest. Swear to fucking God.
At auxiliary.
Swear to God that this happened. Showed up, and this was the first day. Showed up the next 2 days, was like super stoked, felt so good. You know, was like, I don't want to hurt people. I didn't know this was a thing. So that was, you know, the best possible fucking outcome. And then, you know, the third person that I recall from last year being approached was perceived as white, but was not white. And so, you know, it was like, the way that the person from the collective approached them was like, hi, like I perceive you as white, and we have like this like expectation that like, you know, if you're a white person with dreadlocks in the space, like somebody from the collective will like have a conversation with you about it. But it was determined this person was in fact not white, and so conversation ended there. Politely apologized, walked away. You know. So
can you tell me a little bit about like what that conversation is like?
Yes, I've had it many times. It's like, yeah, it's uncomfortable. We last year or the year before did some internal training on how to like de-escalate, de-escalate social situations. There's a lot involved that maybe like you don't realize immediately in terms of like posture, distance, volume, things like that really do make a difference. But yeah, I mean, a lot of times people can become very defensive and start saying things that don't make sense or like aren't relevant. And we just try to have compassion because like the truth of the matter is like we don't want to exclude people. We don't want people to leave the space. Like we're not having this conversation because this person doesn't matter to us. In fact, it's the opposite. There have been people are grateful that we do this. We try to like have as much tact and empathy and understanding. If somebody gets mad at us, if somebody gets defensive and won't have a conversation with us, then like that's like grounds for being like, I'm sorry, you can't hang. But if somebody's open to talking with us, we trust people to make a decision with the information that we give them if they're willing to hear it.
In addition to the steps that the collective is taking to maintain accountability among fest attendees, they're also working on developing accountability within the collective. They're working with other local organizations such as F12, which, with any luck, you'll hear more about in a future episode, to bring training to their members in de-escalation tactics and best practices for creating a safe and inclusive environment at DIY shows. Now, it's worth noting that Fed Up Fest's methods for addressing things like cultural appropriation, privilege, and oppressive power structures are not perfect, and they'd be the first ones to tell you that. They have their critics, and there are folks who feel uncomfortable at their shows. Now, I've never been to Fed Up Fest myself, though I've talked to several people who have. And though the majority of them are excited about and grateful for the strategies framed in their community of care statement, there have been some who have felt antagonized by them. It seems like everyone has an opinion about how to do this right and what a safe space ought to look like, and that's awesome. Let's explore and share ideas and keep learning. But whatever the state of the debate is, what really counts is trying something right now to keep your community safe and peaceful. If you put on shows, take some steps tonight, this weekend, or whenever your next event is. If you go to events, do some research, share your ideas, and be vigilant the next time you're out. Have better ideas of how to create safe spaces? Start a conversation. Your community is in your hands. If you're interested in de-escalation, empowerment, and accountability methods, try to talk with one of Fed Up Fest's organizers to learn more or to share your ideas. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. You can reach them on Facebook, by email, or of course at the fest. And we'd also love to hear from you as well. Shoot us an email at thelocalglow@gmail.com with any ideas or even stories related to this. Before Masha, Ash, and E had to bounce, I asked them to share a few quick actionable steps that you and me can take at local shows wherever we are. They gave some great answers. Here are just a few. Number 1, for the bookers in our audience, cue the music. Be intentional.
It's 2017. There's tons of bands out there that feature queer and trans folks. You can book them. Also feature like queer and trans folks of color. It's not a tokenizing thing. Don't like put one band on your bill just to fill that quota. It's like really easy to find a ton of bands to feature. So if you have that power, exercise it. If you're just a show goer, go to shows that support those people.
Number 2, show goers. Read the room.
It's really not hard to figure out if it's an appropriate time to mosh or if it's an appropriate time to, comment on someone. Even if you think it's a compliment, there's a lot that can be said about just reading the vibes of the room, reading the vibes of a person. You may feel like you're being supportive. You may feel like you're really into something, but yeah, definitely stand back sometimes. Move back if you need to. I don't just mean like physically. I mean like it might be appropriate sometimes to just let other folks be centered and, everyone can have a good time that way.
3, talk to people. Don't call the cops.
You see shit, like, talk to people. Like, don't call the fucking cops. Who the fuck are you? Don't call the cops. Find the people who have, like, the show space, like, and try to get people involved. There's some, like, last resort, I guess, times where you might want to call the cops. I don't know. Some people I know say that, but I don't. I think you can talk to people.
Do not do it. If there's queer and trans people, if there's people, like, do not do it.
Number 4, got privilege? Get in between.
Right on, put your body in between some shit. Literally. Yeah, like you see something fucked up happening, like get in between,
5, we touched on this before. Don't gender people.
Ask people straight up what their pronouns are. Try to use their names over and just like use awkward language before you just assume somebody's gender. That's fine.
And 6, for our DIY showrunners. Acknowledge responsibility for your space.
How and why are you choosing to bring this into your life? And having a little bit of intention behind that can go a long way. There's small things that can be done. Maybe like you don't get as fucked up as you normally would if you were at a different show. Like be a little bit more sober. So if the cops do show up, like you can be there to navigate that. Or like if there is some kind of a situation, you can be there to like separate people or like whatever it might look like.
That's it for today. This episode was produced by me, Tarek Shahada, and Laura Shahada, and contains some great original music by 3 Chicago queercore bands, which will be playing Fed Up Fest next week. In order, you heard Gene Jam, Slop Sync, and Nervous Wreck. You also heard some beautiful ambient tunes by David Mantell of Naal. A big thank you to Jesus Monroy and M. Echeverria for their contributions to the episode. If you want to learn more about Fed Up Fest, check out their Facebook, linked in the show notes. Also, check out their companion podcast, Queer Cafeteria, where you can grab a seat with them at the Queer Kids table to discuss topics like consent, race, media, anarchy, and more. The Local Glow is a brand new independent podcast out of Chicago, Illinois. And by independent, I mean bold, unfettered, explorative, unique, and lacking consistent financial support. If you want to help us out with sharing these stories and connecting cultures, consider becoming a patron of The Local Glow through the website Patreon, even just for $1 a month. Find us at patreon.com/thelocalglow. You can get some cool perks, including a shout out in a future episode, basically immortalizing you, which is pretty sick. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts to get all of our future episodes. And of course, go give us a like on Facebook and share our page with your friends if you've enjoyed listening. Thanks so much for hanging out with The Local Glow.
No, thank you very much. All right, bye.